Today, we're going to talk about dial calipers. This is a very important tool that you should use in your shop. So this is a dial caliper, and I think that you should become very familiar with it for accuracy and repetition on milling material. I prefer a dial caliper over an electronic caliper because electronic calipers are almost like planned obsolescence. I'm sure if any of you have bought an electronic set of dial calipers in the 5 years, it's probably sitting in your toolbox without batteries and you don't want to throw it away because you're going to get batteries, but you haven't got batteries in 4 years, so it's pretty much just junk. So I prefer to go with these. They'll always be reliable, they'll always be good to go. So the first thing I want to talk about is that a dial caliper primarily takes 3 types of measurements. Okay, so if we look up here, we have our outside jaws, and we can pinch an object in this to get a reading and a measurement. We also have the inside jaws up top, and we also have the depth stop right here. So I can show this up here. Is it in focus? So right here we can pinch something. Right here we can take a inside measurement. And right here we can take a depth measurement, okay? So why people avoid reading these is because they believe that it's overcomplicated, so they would prefer to get an electronic one. And it is a little bit complicated, but with a little practice, you'll love it, okay? So if we look at the dial, you can see that it moves as I open or close the jaws, okay? And every one of those tick marks is going to be 1/1000th of an inch, okay? If you also look here, we have numbers written on the side, okay? So when we start, this is how I always tell people to write down their numbers when they're learning. 0.000, because that's exactly how this is going to measure. And then when something changes, you will slowly adjust these 3 numbers and occasionally this number. So this number represents the inches. So when you go above 1 inch, this will suddenly become 1, okay? A 1/2 inch, you would change the tens, which would be 0.500. 3/4 of an inch would be 0.750. Okay, so far pretty simple. There's a couple mechanical parts to it. So this knob that my finger's touching here is to open and close the jaws. This knob here will lock the jaws and prevent it from opening and closing. So if you have a measurement that you want to repeat, that's what you would use that for. And the dial itself rotates, okay? So why the dial itself rotates? Because if you drop these or something and the needle gets knocked out of whack, you can always zero it out. And zeroing these out is the first step that you ever want to take when you're using a pair of dial calipers. And how I'll do that is I'm just going to close them all the way, and then I'm going to move the 0 to be aligned with the needle. So right now, with our dial calipers closed all the way, our reading is 0.000, okay? Now, let's say I move this dial caliper, ooh, jumped on me right there, 6 ticks to the right, all right? So I can look at that clearly says 6. So now my measurement will change to 0.006. Sorry about that, bad writing. Okay, Now, let's move past that. Now we moved it to 15 ticks past 0. How this is going to read now is 0.015. And this represents 15 thousandths of an inch. So right now I'm 0.015. Now let's say I rotate this dial all the way around and back to the 15th. So now that's going to be 0.115 or 115 thousandths of an inch. Now I want you to notice something. So right here we can see a number 1, and that's where that 1 in the tenths place will come in to play here. So let's say I rotate it another full 360-degree rotation. Now the reading will be 0.215. Okay? Now I'm going to move this up an entire inch. So now it'll be 1.215. So now let's look at our numbers. You're going to notice here's this 0 and this 0, or in this 1. And this represents the whole numbers, okay? And then the smaller numbers represents the tenths. Now we're reading a whole number of 1.215, okay? So let's say we want a half an inch. What would a half an inch be? Well, we know that's an easy number that woodworkers work with all the time. It's 0.500. So I'm going to move this down here. And we'll notice, I can see the 5. So it's 0.500. I would like to show you how to take different measurements on this widget. For an interior measurement, we will use these two teeth on the top. And what I will do, first, zero out my caliper, it's zeroed, and I'm going to spread those teeth out to press up against the sides, and then I'll take my reading. So it's 1.734, okay? Let's say that I wanted to know how deep that this pocket was. Well, I could measure that with this dial caliper. The first thing I always want to do, especially when transitioning to a depth measurement, is I'm going to zero out my calipers. And this one just happens to be right on the money. So I'm going to extend out this little point here. I'm going to place it in the pocket, and I will press down the calipers until I get my reading. And this says that it's 0.250, right on the money. Now, let's say that I wanted to measure the thickness of this board, which is the most common use that you'll probably use. All I need to do is pinch the board, and I like to take a reading while it's pinched, and this is 0.754. So this is 4 thousandths of an inch off 3/4 of an inch. I would say that's pretty good. Dial calipers should be used whenever you are doing any kind of project that requires precision, especially when you are thicknessing boards through the planer. I like to use a dial caliper to get down to 3/4 of an inch or whatever thickness I'm planing to. That way I know it's right on the money. And if later on I need to create another part, I can create it right to 3/4 of an inch. If you use a measuring tape, it's going to be quite a bit different and a lot of variation that's going to cause you some problems down the road.